Hey there, I'm John Negroni, film editor for theyoungfolks.com. I'm also the host of the Cinemaholics podcast, where I review new movies every single week in even more detail with my fellow critic and my co-host, Will Ashton. So if you like podcasts and if you like my opinions on things, be sure to check that out when you get a chance. The Kingsman is a prequel to the ongoing Kingsman film franchise, which began in 2014 with Kingsman: The Secret Service. That was based, of course, on the comic book, The Secret Service, I think it's called. And that was always a modern riff on old-fashioned British spy movies with far more bombastic action set pieces and an earned R rating. So not James Bond, to be sure. Matthew Vaughn directed that film, the 2014 one, and its 2017 sequel, Kingsman: The Golden Circle. But rather than continue the trilogy with this next installment, Vaughn instead returns with a film explaining the origins of the Kingsmen, who are a private intelligence service, if you recall, with code names based on King Arthur characters and a base of operations hidden in an upscale London tailor shop. So where did the Kingsmen get their start? Well, in the service, the Secret Service, there is a bit of dialogue establishing that the group began during World War I. So naturally, Vaughn and his co-screenwriter Karl Gajusek, who was a showrunner, I think, for the first season of Stranger Things, they begin this story at the turn of the 20th century, and yes, I get it, it's 20th Century Studios. You can make your jokes. Before the Kingsmen, there was a man named Orlando Oxford, played charmingly as ever by Ralph Fiennes, who is a pacifist, nevertheless finding himself caught up in the geopolitical turmoil of an impending boiling conflict between the UK, Germany, and Russia. The film actually does delve into some real history involving what really set off World War I, down to the assassination of a certain archduke, but also why a single assassination of someone in a relatively small European country would be enough to set Europe ablaze with artillery fire. That's not to say the Kingsman is anything close to a history class, though it does admirably invent plenty of excuses for thrills, with this massive World War event in the backdrop. Oxford's son, Conrad, is played by Harris Dickinson as sort of the Eggsy stand-in from the other films, and that he's young, full of promise, and determined to prove himself. Though the key difference is that Conrad was born into a life of luxurious privilege, motivating him to serve his country and the world by extension as a means of doing his duty. He feels like he owes it. We mostly see Conrad and his father at personal odds, however, as the film is at battle with itself over the ethics of warfare, whether it be braving no man's land as a soldier, cracking codes based on stolen information, or determining the identities of an evil cabal behind the whole thing, because, well, this is a Kingsman movie. But this really isn't a film with all that much to say beyond how brilliant would it be to make a Kingsman movie set in the 1910s? And indeed, the concept of this film is brilliant. The setup of building the Kingsman from the ground up with a sparkling ensemble featuring the talents of Gemma Arterton and Djimon Hounsou as the Oxford family's longtime allies and confidants, it's undeniably what's needed, I think, to reignite the Kingsman films, make them feel really fresh again, in a way that sets it apart, too, from so many other action franchises that are content to oversize their budgets on computer effects over practical wizardry and fight choreography that makes you wince in awe at what you're actually seeing. So why does this film come off like one of the biggest missed opportunities of 2021, at least to me? It should be mentioned that The Kingsman was delayed many times, partly due to COVID, also due to Marvel moving some of its films around. And this one is arriving something like 2 years after it was initially supposed to come out, so there is a matter of waning expectations at play here. This is a film that comes off as rather confused at its own existence, honestly, where it will at one point firmly be as entertaining and whiz-bang as any other Kingsman movie, where characters are flying around and doing outrageous stunts, and it's pretty fun to see. But then, once the fun is over, it leans upright in its chair with dry, uninspired, even repetitive arguments over what should be done next. Why this country just did that. Why you can't fight in the war. Oh, and here's how I feel about how you felt about feeling that. Look, Matthew Vaughn, he had a lot of great ideas for this movie when drafting the script. For example, there's an entire sequence where one of the villains, Rasputin, played by Rhys Ifans, engages Hansu's character Shola in a spectacular sword fight where he's even evoking Russian dance and moving like the mad monk that he is. Moments like these are exactly what fans of these films, myself included, come to see. It reminds of the all-time greatest cinema sword fights, namely in The Mark of Zorro between Tyrone Power and Basil Rathbone. It actually has that energy. I was so excited to see that. With the way the camera moves is perfectly asymmetrical. Not perfectly symmetrical, perfectly asymmetrical to the zigzagging movement of the actors doing battle. You really have to see it to believe it. A later sword fight involving a gun also plays and experiments with fresh angles and visceral cuts that get the full effect of how terrifying it would be to actually cross blades with someone else in a kill or be killed scenario. Specifically when it matches the main theme of Ralph Fiennes' Oxford, who, like I said before, is a pacifist at heart. It would all be fine enough if the central characters had a central conflict at all investing or surprising, given their foundations, which are well written. Conrad, as I mentioned, has all the privilege of a man his age, never having to really overcome profound difficulties growing up, aside from the death of his mother. But that itself is sure footing for a character who wants to be a hero because he couldn't be one for his mom, and there's also a guilt behind the idea that he gets to live comfortably while others die for the cause. As the film progresses, his arc certainly makes sense as he finds, there might be other ways to serve his country besides being infantry fodder. So perhaps he can utilize his privilege in a more effective way for the sake of saving the world. I don't know how much that's going to land with audiences in the UK. I understand in the UK, class warfare is usually a bigger thing than in other countries like America. I mean, class is definitely a big thing in America, but from what I've been told, it's kind of a bit more intense overseas, but I'm just saying, I don't know that for sure. So in this movie, just when Conrad seems like he's learning that lesson, that maybe he can do something else, maybe there's something for him that he's destined to do that really fits his skill set, the movie just swerves into something else entirely. Like, this next part of the script was written for a completely different film. Worse, the final act, while it's an astounding and entertaining set piece on the whole, no doubt. It has a sequence involving a harrowing plane crash and a subsequent ice climb up an ice wall. It really is fantastic stuff. But the finale is built around our heroes needing to get their hands on something innocuous so someone else might not be embarrassed and decide to do something that they should do anyway. And it's something that was perhaps maybe funny when it was written in the script, but as executed, the serious tone of these people fighting a global conflict and losing loved ones in the process just doesn't match gracefully with the stakes of the actual plot, which amount to little more than a juvenile joke. There's almost an awkwardness or unintentional insecurity when the film lets itself loose finally, and it's a far cry from the magic of the Secret Service and the Golden Circle too, which I know not everybody liked the Golden Circle, but I really dug Golden Circle myself. And the whole punchline of Secret Service though, because the first one is undeniably the best one, it all made sense. The setup, the joke of it. You have these dapper gentlemen who are seemingly unimpressive in the physical department. It's Colin Firth. He's a strapping man, but when you see him, you don't think that he is this intimidating, can beat everybody up kind of guy. But as we see, he can lay waste to hordes of henchmen without breaking much of a sweat. And the film also had a really sharp emotional hook with Eggsy, who's this lower class young man who can fit the suit just as well, if not better, than anyone else, no matter how rich they are or how impressive their last name is. The tone in that film worked because the film knew exactly when to take itself seriously on an emotional level, which wasn't that often, to be clear, and when to kick up the amusement with visual gags and shock humor. And yes, it's thoughtful, if not a little dated social commentary. That's when that movie really shined. The Kingsman, by comparison, it's a mixed bag of, yes, impressive action filmmaking, very good performances, decent performances, particularly by Fiennes, who really saves this film from utter ruin, I think, alongside Arterton and Hansu. They're the triple threat. but not much else is really holding this movie together for me. It's a film crammed with good starts to good ideas, only for them to end just abruptly, to end awkwardly, not go in the right directions you'd think, or go in directions that don't feel inevitable or thought through to their fullest potential. It's such a shame because The Kingsman does so many things right. It's certainly bold, and it's refreshing in its choice of subject matter and how it joyfully ruins typical action movie tropes at times, and its wonderful big adventure feel. That's something I always want from movies. I always miss it because we don't get a lot of it at all. It reminds me in some of those ways like The Man Who Would Be King or Lawrence of Arabia to a lesser extent. Vaughn is clearly still interested in telling unique stories, not just in terms of the lore and the mythology, but also what can be done with fight choreography, quick zooms, and characterization through historical hysteria. But one good indication of this film's quality, if I can sum it up, is in the final act, there's a reveal that is so obvious, so predictable, so underwhelming, yet all the indelible intensity coming before it seemingly bows down to this being the moment where it all comes together and is all of some great import. It isn't. But the film, it can't quite seem to get in on its own joke. So for me, I feel so awful about it because, again, I can't say enough of the good things I really like because there's just so many good things in this. But as a movie, it just does not fully work. So it is not really a recommendation for me unless you really are a hardcore fan of the franchise. You really want to check this one out. But if you've had a lot of issues with Kingsman in the past, if you didn't like the first two or even the second one, but you might have vaguely liked the first one, I don't think this one is definitely a priority for you, most likely. I hope people do like it for the reasons that I like it. I just worry that people will have the same frustrations as always. So The Kingsman, it opens in theaters starting December 22nd through 20th Century Studios. I really have no idea how other people are going to react to this movie. It definitely feels like a film that might get some applause for doing some things that are, like I said before, kind of bold. It takes some swings that I got to give it a lot of respect, but yeah, ultimately I don't come out of this one as happy as I wanted to be, and my expectations weren't that high, as I mentioned before. I managed my expectations accordingly, and I wish it would have been better. But that's The Kingsman. Not a terrible film, but certainly one that definitely feels like it could have been so much better, and it makes me sad that it isn't. So that's it for me on this one. The next film I'm going to be seeing and talking about, I did see Don't Look Up. I don't know if I'm going to be doing a review of that. I'm kind of late to the party on that one anyway. I'm thinking about it, though. It's just I have other things that I want to get to. I also want to talk about Spider-Man No Way Home. I'm going to be seeing that tomorrow, depending on when you're seeing this, and I want to be able to turn a video around on that pretty quickly. Otherwise, we have lots of other movies coming out this month, so if you really want me to talk about Don't Look Up, you can mention it. I don't know. It is an interesting movie. It is a movie that I have a lot to say, so we'll have to see on that one. But until then, I will see you all on the next one.